The period of 1870 to 1920 marks the greatest period of immigration in American history. America is now a melting pot. A melting pot is a mixture of people and different cultures and different races.
The first group of immigrants to focus on are European immigrants. Between 1870 and 1920, over 20 million Europeans came to the United States. In the early periods of the era of immigration, most European immigrants came from Western and Northern Europe, countries like Ireland, England, and France. In the later part of the era, most European immigrants came from Eastern and Southern Europe, countries like Russia, Germany, and Italy. There are several reasons why European immigrants came to the United States during this era. They wanted to escape religious persecution, rising populations in Europe, and satisfy a need for reform and a new beginning. Like early American colonists, many European immigrants were fleeing religious persecution. Specifically, Russian Jews fled persecution in Tsarist Russia. With rising populations in European countries, overcrowding and a lack of farmland meant that America was a viable option to start a new life and a new economic beginning. And many Europeans, tired and weary of a century of war and chaos, decided to resettle their lives in America, a nation with political stability, democratic freedom, and economic prosperity.
The next group of immigrants are Asian immigrants. The reason Asian immigrants came to America was for wages and work. They were hired because they would work for less than Americans, and they were able to take their money and send it home where it had more purchasing power. In 1848, Asians, particularly from China and Japan, came in droves. They were seeking the fortunes of the California gold rush. Another industry in which Asian immigrants worked was on the railroads. They worked for cheap and often took jobs away from American workers, which caused resentment and led to violence towards them. By 1920, there were over 200,000 Asian immigrants living on the West Coast.
With the massive amount of immigrants coming into the country on both coasts, immigration checkpoint stations were needed in order to manage immigrant entry into the United States. On the East Coast, the most famous immigration checkpoint station was Ellis Island. Ellis Island was centered in New York, and it was the arrival point for all European immigrants coming into the United States.
The main immigration station on the West Coast was called Angel Island. It was located in San Francisco Harbor. It was the arrival point for all immigrants coming from Asia. Once in America, Asian immigrants faced discrimination more than any other group. Their language, look, and customary clothing was strange to most Americans. It was something that Americans had never seen before. Americans feared they were taking scarce jobs away. They were willing to work for less than whites. Some whites believed that if left unchecked, this riffraff would ruin America.
For many immigrants, life in America was not all it was cracked up to be. They faced many problems once they entered the country. A serious problem faced by many immigrants was culture shock. Culture shock was the panic and confusion faced from living in a strange society with new customs and beliefs. To survive culture shock, immigrants moved into ethnic communities in urban cities. Ethnic communities allowed immigrants to work, live, and worship with their own people without the fear of being discriminated or taken advantage of. Today, we see these ethnic communities in every major American city. Little Italy, Koreatown, Little Tokyo, Chinatown. Many of these ethnic communities from this time period still thrive today.
Cities and urban centers were attracted to new immigrants coming in from other countries. As cities' populations swelled, pressure on immigrants became intense. Overcrowding and urban problems were blamed on immigrants. All of this leads to the Americanization movement. The Americanization movement was an educational program offered to immigrants to help ease them into society. This movement helped to assimilate immigrants by teaching immigrants to read and write in English. This program also helped to teach immigrants U.S. history, civics, and government. One of the most important aspects of the Americanization movement was teaching immigrants American etiquette to deal with the culture shock of moving to America. Another problem that immigrants encountered was the idea of nativism. Nativism is anti-immigrant sentiment and favoritism toward native-born white Americans. Nativists generally hated Southern and Eastern Europeans, and Asians the most. They felt that Southern and Eastern Europeans were of darker complexion and less educated. They also didn't understand Asian customs because they were so different from those in America, and felt that their willingness to work for less would steal jobs away from white Americans. Most immigrants assimilated into American culture. Those that didn't faced the wrath and prejudice of nativists.
The issue of Asian immigrants stealing jobs away from white Americans spurred American labor groups to lobby to end Asian immigration altogether into the United States. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. This act banned permanent Chinese immigration to the United States for 10 years. Then, in 1892, the act was extended for another 10 years. In 1902, the act was extended officially until 1943. Altogether, This means that the United States Congress, at one point in American history, banned Chinese immigration into the United States for almost 60 years.
The era of immigration helped to mold American society into what you see today. American culture is greatly influenced by the contributions of immigrants. Americans are able to experience different cultures in ways that other countries are not able to because of the era of immigration.